Kia ora koutou. It's so marvelous to be back here. I feel that this is whānau when I come back to Foundation North. In fact, the first time I came here, it was a very busy place because it was about 5 days before the opening of the new space, and people were planting, and there was sort of frenetic activity. So I feel very much at home in this space because I spent time in this space just as it was launching. And I want to say thank you so much to Foundation North, to Jenny and Allison, the Center for Social Impact and Akina, who have just been so supportive and generous, dear friends of working together and looking at opportunities really to do cool stuff together. So it's great to be back with you. And I love that I am the inaugural person for these KŌTUITUI, interweaving conversations. That word will now be very much present in my conversation because I feel in a lot of ways here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that is very much what my work has been about. It's been a lot of noticings of lots of very powerful work that's happening in lots of different places and trying to bring a bridge to bring it together. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, but mostly my perspective on your story, the story of social enterprise as it's developing. And hopefully today we can start to weave together the beginning of the future story for social enterprise. It is a really exciting time. I can feel the energy building up to the World Forum next week, and we have a great day tomorrow getting that kicked off here in Auckland. So it's just an incredibly exciting time to be here. A little bit of context about me and my background. I have a consulting background, really around transformation in organizations and communities. I've worked across all sectors, and some of my most exciting work was multi-sector. So that was my background. And when the recession came, it was a natural, really, to start working with social enterprise because so many organizations were going back to the drawing board and thinking about how they could be sustainable in a resource-poor environment. So I started having more client social enterprises, but actually what really got me going was I started coaching and mentoring as a volunteer at my local university, Brown University. And I really found at a time that was feeling very distressing that the students blew my socks off. They were so intelligent, creative, tenacious, and what struck me is their ability to cross boundaries. They were coming together across disciplines in a way that I just hadn't experienced among most of my client groups. So I got more and more involved in the university, and eventually I was asked to design a new course for them for all students with startups. And when I told that story here, when I came as a fellow, people were very cynical. You know, that's nice, it's sweet when university students do startups. You know, it's sort of like a little playground you know, to try things out. And that wasn't at all the case. Many of those enterprises are now large, viable international businesses. So I was learning as much as I was sharing with my students, and that was sort of a springboard for me to come to New Zealand in 2013. So I want to say one more thing about my perspective. One of the things that happened after I came here was that among the many ventures that I researched, one was LOOMIO. And if you haven't heard of LOOMIO, it's based in Wellington, but it's a global enterprise, and it's a tech platform for collaborative decision making. And first I was really taken by the product because when I think about my client work, all of my clients, I'd say 100%, suffered of the pain of collaborating. How difficult it is to get the right people in the room and to work through, to really leverage differences towards a better outcome. So I felt the pain of that issue and this group trying to solve that with an online platform. But really, as much I felt for the team. And they were just so smart and so committed to the work they were doing. And they were also very clever because they saw a fellow who was available. And so they kept inviting me for tea, for coffee, for walks, for wine, and asking me lots of questions about their business. And the last week, I'm not kidding, the last week before I got on the plane to go back to the US, they asked if I'd like to continue to work with them. So fast forward, I said, sure, I'm totally taken. And in 2014, I came back again, and LOOMIO is a worker-owned co-op. I joined the co-op, so I've been a worker-owner for 4 years, and I've recently joined the board. So one of the reasons I've been able to come back a couple of times a year is that I've been deeply immersed in this fantastic enterprise. And I would not be a good social entrepreneur if I did not do a momentary commercial, so I'm going to do it right now and get it out of the way. If you haven't heard or don't know about LOOMIO, take a look, loomio.org, because this is a real success story here in New Zealand. It's a global enterprise. We're in 100 countries. We're translated into over 35 languages. And so we're really powerful both with citizen digital technology, but also with helping workplaces be more effective. And the exciting thing is we're doing a special discount for the World Forum. So you can go on right now and get a special discount. So this is a great time to check out LOOMIO, and I hope you will ask me more questions if you have them. This slide, though, is what I wanted to share is when I think of social enterprise here in New Zealand and anywhere, I think from many perspectives. I now consider myself a social entrepreneur with LOOMIO, but I've also spent time and continue to as an academic. I've been teaching at Brown, both social enterprise and adaptive strategy, and I've recently been appointed an associate at the Berkman Center at Harvard University, the Center for Internet and Society. So I have an academic lens as well, but I also have a government lens. I sit on the board of our Economic Development Agency in Rhode Island. So I very much am sitting with a government perspective. I'm also on the board of our intermediary social enterprise greenhouse. So I have a trustee perspective, I have an intermediary perspective, and who here has heard of Inspiral? Fantastic. So Inspiral is another homegrown innovation from New Zealand, and it's a global network really getting huge attention for peer-to-peer innovation. Lucas has beautifully joined us from Inspiral, and there are many people across New Zealand but across the globe. So I'm also part of the Inspiral network, and have just been learning heaps about the potential of peer-to-peer sharing and peer-to-peer impact. And I've just thrown up the Center for Social Impact because we're continuing to look at ways that I can have an ongoing role to help the work here, both at the foundation and for the center. So when I look at the field, I look through many lenses, and I think that's important because I think one of the things more than anything that I've noticed that has not progressed from 2013 when I first came to now is the work is still quite siloed. If I had to say one headline, I would say it's quite siloed. You know, we're still, philanthropy is sort of focused on philanthropy, and corporates on corporate, and government on government, and academia on academia. And I see more and more good work happening. There's no doubt there's a lot of progress being made, but I see an opportunity for more than the sum of the parts by doing bridging. And so let me just say a little bit more about that. I will take you back just to give you some reference point in terms of the research that I did in 2013. When I was a fellow, I wanted to look at where the gaps were, and immediately coming from a university that was just buzzing with new programming and academic papers in social enterprise, I was surprised to find there was not one paper undergraduate in 2013 in social enterprise. And this is really a serious outlier from what I would say comparable countries across the globe. So if you look at Canada, Australia, Scotland, even South Korea, many other countries have developed huge interest in academia, doing papers. And the thing about doing it at the undergraduate level is that you have not only the students gaining an interest, beginning to think about things in a whole system way, but also they're beginning to come up with ideas, really have a practice field as social entrepreneurs, and they're beginning to do the baseline research, which then, for those that have interest in it, continues. So one of the things that it translates here, the lack of formal academic coursework means that there's just not as much of that research also feeding into the work. So I really found Social enterprise was at its infancy in 2013. There was very little visibility to the field. As I've said, limited research, few academic papers, no government policy. People were struggling, I would dare say stuck, with the issue of definition. Very few enablers. I was working quite actively with Akina in its earlier stage and working on the smell of an oily rag. No investment. However, there were a lot of startups forming. And this was quite interesting. One of the terms I used in my paper was throwing the sheet over the ghost. I felt that I was seeing a lot of activity, but it was under the radar. And if there was one thing I was able to do in my time here through my formal paper, but frankly more from running around and introducing people, it was to start to give form to the people and the good work that was starting to be incubated here. So I really did find in 2013, this is not distinctive to New Zealand, but people were struggling with what the heck is social enterprise? How do we define it? The UK was trying to be more precise about it because they were starting to look at consumers wanting a brand like organics or fair trade. And so they were really working on, can we define what percentage has to be trading for an NGO to qualify as a social enterprise? So there was a lot of discussion, a lot of charts, a lot of scratching the head. This particular chart comes from my intermediary, Social Enterprise Greenhouse, and we've recently produced this because it's a very dynamic question, what's the definition? Because the whole space from NGO to corporates is changing quite dynamically. And I would dare say every enterprise is beginning to think about what does it mean to have multiple bottom line. So if you think about NGOs, traditional charities on the left, and the rare corporate, frankly, that's pure profit maximizing on the right, there's more and more organizations of different forms that are moving into this blended value middle ground. And so it's very confusing. There might be NGOs with a growing percentage coming from trade that you might call a social enterprise. But LOOMIO, for instance, we're a business cooperative, and we consider ourselves a social enterprise and are looking to have our income primarily through revenue, but reinvested back into the social purpose. Then there's B Lab, for instance, which are businesses that have maybe considered themselves traditional businesses, but have taken an assessment and gotten validation that they meet certain criteria around triple bottom line. More and more businesses are taking that assessment and getting certified. And in fact, in my community, we've just done a partnership with B Lab. Rhode Island, where I'm from, is the smallest state, and we're now doing a campaign to have every small and medium-sized business consider taking the assessment to begin really to claim a thought process, mindfulness about triple bottom line, and then to begin the journey of where do we stand, and is there low-hanging fruit that we would love to pursue. Maybe we just haven't thought about it. We haven't had the information. And then we'll have supports from other community members to guide them on that journey. So I think traditional business is going to have more and more of a role to play. And when we think not about social enterprise, but social impact, I think that's really important. I recently attended a national meeting of shared value. And when I was here, I was introduced to Michael Porter from Harvard's paper on shared value. That was new to me, and I thought, this is fantastic. Corporates really thinking about their role to make the world better. And the next thing I knew, I came to New York, and there were 1,000 people deeply engaged in thinking about big corporations. Toyota saying we don't consider ourselves in the automobile industry anymore. We're in the people moving business. And one of the things they had done was to incubate some artificial technology for people who are blind to be able to navigate their way better out in the community. So this is different than corporate responsibility. This is really thinking about core business, not to say that you're not still on the exchange and not still accountable to shareholders, but that you're thinking that central to your business model is a different way of thinking about your responsibility to the community and to the environment and to your employees. So I think the issue of definition is very important, and we need to keep asking ourselves, what do we mean by social enterprise? But we need to understand it's a very dynamic context, broader environment. And so we need to keep talking about it, thinking about it, researching it, be open to seeing it adapt, and not be stuck on, that we can't move forward because we're not quite sure where social enterprise fits in. So where has New Zealand moved since 2013? You've moved quite readily, I would say. There's been a lot of activity, and it's been very exciting. So the government has stood up and said, we acknowledge that social enterprise exists, that it's important, and that we think in New Zealand it has merit, and we should do more to grow the sector. So it was, in some ways, a very small move, and in some ways, a very big move, just to get the national government to begin to put more attention to the field. In 2016, there was a report done for the Minister of the Community and Voluntary Sector that put some hooks on that framing and began to identify a need for even more attention. Akina has been a key player for sure as an intermediary. There are others, Social Enterprise Auckland has formed, and others, hubs and community bases that are seeing the potential and gathering and providing supports ranging from supporting entrepreneurs to looking at new models of investment and lots of other work. So there's been consistent progress. And of course, this year, there was a fantastic decision by the government to put $5.5 million into a fund to further the field over the next 4 years. There was, Roy mentioned the Impact Fund, which will be the first, I believe, in the country, which is going to be a huge development. And I think you cannot underestimate how powerful it is that New Zealand is hosting the World Forum. 1,400 participants coming from all over the world, and really viewing that this is an important place to gather and to learn and share together and understand this field. So there have been great developments.
Yes. Just based on your previous broader definition of social enterprise, I guess if you overlay iwi over top of this and considered a $30 billion Māori economy and saw the huge advancements that iwi have made over the years, then probably it broadens the development from the social enterprise quite significantly than the lens that you're showing up here, because Tainui, Ngāi Tahu, Ngāti Whātua, with balance sheets now probably around the $600 million mark, and significant investment back into their businesses and growth into their social arms and into their people. It's probably, if you put a Māori lens on this as well, you're probably significantly different in terms of the picture of growth in the social enterprise.
I really appreciate your comment. I think it's an excellent one. I think that's absolutely true. And one of the things I did quite a bit when I was here in 2013 was to meet with iwi and talk about social enterprise. And what I found, and I think why it's not reflected, and that's probably my doing, is that the language was different, and the language of social enterprise wasn't necessarily the language that was being used among the iwi. And I think and I find that with government too, they do a lot of separating. There's, when I first came here, a lot of the nonprofits, the charity sector, are also doing social enterprise, and we're also not using that language. So I agree with you. And when I talk about, let's say, the arts sector has been doing social enterprise from the beginning, right? Because they would ask people to, pay to come to theater or comes, to support a production or whatever. So I think you raise a really important point, and I think it goes to that research piece and the naming piece and the intersectionality piece of, and it really is true. I think there's much more there. And I think bringing those different pieces together, you will find a momentum that isn't captured by sort of continuing to see things in a piecemeal way. So I really appreciate that comment. I borrowed this from Akina, from their report about some of the opportunities looking forward, and I have to say I completely agree. They have identified 4 main categories: sector development, building capability, facilitating finance, and increasing market activity. And I couldn't agree more. I'm not here to conduct new analysis as much to share some reflections. So I thought picking up their analysis was really important. And I'll just highlight a few additional thoughts from my perspective. I think that there's been so much movement, but the time is right to accelerate momentum. You know, I think there's a difference between lots of activity and impact. And I think it is about connecting the dots, you know, between different sectors, between iwi and philanthropy, between academia and the charity sector, between government and corporate. I think you'll see lots and lots of important activity, and if you begin to connect those bridges, you're going to see there's the potential really to build something that's much bigger and more powerful. And I actually, you know, perhaps it's because I spent last week with the Center for Social Impact, but I think impact is more important than social enterprise per se. I've gotten very passionate about social enterprise, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for social enterprise. But I think all of us are here today, I'm guessing, and are doing our work in search of social impact, social, environmental, cultural impact, progress. So I think keeping that lens is really important, because I think we can grow. The thing that's beautiful about social enterprise, it's the win-win. If you can have a sustainable model that is embedded in the community, that is doing good for the people who are doing the work, for the community, and for the environment, that's fantastic. That's not going to be all business or all enterprise. I think the charity sector is so critical, because not all needs will be able to be make progress with that kind of a model. So there's a reason we have these different sectors, and they're all valuable. But it's thinking about how they can be in service together towards shared impact. So in terms of some thoughts that I have, I know it's an interesting time to arrive right before an election. However that turns out, I think there does need to be more proactive commitment and leadership from the government. I think it's been moving along, but I think that it does take that kind of leadership to begin to accelerate the pace of the opportunity. Access to capital, it goes without saying, but I wanted to point out stages are very, very different in what the needs are. When we started at LOOMIO, you really need seed funding. You need philanthropic funding or friends and family funding. You need to get started to be able to take shape to your venture and begin to think about, is there proof of concept? And then you move along and you're testing your business model. You need some different kind of funding. And I'll tell you, we've been maybe 2 or 3 years at LOOMIO still trying to test the business model. We've gotten very innovative investment, a redeemable preference share from 5 countries, and we did have participation from New Zealand, but the vast majority was not. So different kinds of funding and investment approaches are really critical at different stages. And then scale, of course, is a whole nother issue. I think government has an important role to play in New Zealand in scale, but also partnership. I think that different kinds of partnerships are going to be critical when it comes to scaling the ideas that are really working. I've referenced this throughout my talk, bridging networks, and in the US, we're using the term intersectionality quite a bit, and it really is this deep sense of bridging. So honoring our core expertise and commitment to whatever work we're in, but very much appreciating how the bridging makes more than the sum of the parts. And so I think I'm always struck here, everyone says to me, you know, you're always putting people together. And I think the reason we aren't doing more of it is not a lack of interest. It's that we're all very focused and busy, and it's understandable. But resourcing this bridging work, I think, is really critical. I put the impact frame. In our intermediary, we're working on inclusive economic development. So we're working with low-income people from immigrant backgrounds to do social enterprise and even enterprise to help grow their wealth and not to just get a job that isn't going to afford them a basic quality of life. And we're also working at the other end of the spectrum with B-Lab on this initiative with small businesses, and of course social enterprise as well. So I think beginning to appreciate the full spectrum and not get as hung up. It's not to say the definition of social enterprises and the boundaries aren't important, but to recognize that this holism is really key. And the last thing I'll say is governance. I sit on 2 boards, so I can talk about governance as a trustee rather than as a consultant. And I can say as a trustee, it is hard to govern in today's world. It's hard to keep up. It's hard to know the right questions. It's hard to know your accountability relative to complex issues. I was on a hospital board for many years. And it's very difficult to have the content expertise to feel that you can, really be accountable as a trustee. So I think we need to do more work to acknowledge that, not as finger pointing, or as a disconnect between people doing the work and their trustees, but to understand that governance is more complex than ever, and that we need to work on helping all of us understand our roles, understand the work that we're in service to, and really continue to grow governance as well.